Next curve.
Hey everyone, welcome to Next Curve's reThink webcast in our series From the Radio to the RIC, which I get wrong all the time for some reason. I have no idea why. And we're doing this webcast in collaboration with EJL Wireless Research. And so I have Earl Lum, who is the president and founder of EJL Wireless, joining me. Hey, how's it going, Earl?
Great, Leonard. Thanks for having me on this series again.
Yeah, of course. And it's always fun and great partnering with you on this. I think we've had not only some fun, but we've made some good calls, especially as it pertains to Open RAN and a lot of the things that are happening in the network infrastructure space. So, I think this has been a really interesting and fun collaboration, but also it's generated a lot of important insights that I think our audience really appreciates. At least that's the feedback that I get. And I think that should give us motivation to keep going, don't you think?
That's great. Glad to hear it.
Yeah, and so as everybody knows, we were at Mobile World Congress, Las Vegas. Is it this week? It's still this week, right? It just happened this week.
Still this week.
Yeah, from Tuesday through Thursday. And Earl and I were there, the full stint of the event. And this year the theme was, I think was it Velocity?
Velocity. Same theme as Barcelona.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Yeah, I don't quite get it, but that's fine. But what we're going to do on this episode is share some of our perspectives and key takes from the event. And we're also going to see if we can take shine a little bit of a spotlight on our key theme, which is the Open RAN piece, or the RAN infrastructure piece of what we witnessed at Mobile World Congress Las Vegas 2023. So why don't we get started? You want to get started?
Let's get started.
Pretty cool. Okay, cool. So why don't you start?
All right.
Yeah.
If we look at, I guess, if our main themes are going to be about Open RAN and about fixed wireless access, or the buzzwords that private wireless networks, let's start with Open RAN, since this is radio to the RIC. So I think prior to the show starting on Monday, there was a shoe that dropped in the industry regarding Ericsson,
right,
and their commitment, or whatever they're going to be hinting at in terms of what their products are going to be compliant to in 2024, right? So if everything is compliant, then that goes along with what Samsung's already stated in terms of what they're shipping to Dish, which is Open RAN compliant, but works much better with our own stuff, right?
Yeah.
As the asterisks. And at some point, I would expect Nokia to be the other shoe that drops, right? And if they haven't already in that perspective. So then the question becomes, what happens to everyone else in the industry that's spent all this money, time, and effort into research and development, getting products fielded, doing all of the proof of concept testing,
setting up all these labs.
Right. What happens to that? All of that stuff now going forward, if the operators potentially got what they were looking for all along, way back when TIP and the origins of all this open interface stuff started.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that was really notable is almost none of the big RAN vendors showed up. In fact, I don't think that there were any. That could be an accurate statement. It may be inaccurate. Maybe some of the really small players showed up.
Yeah, I think some smaller radio guys and certainly some of the antenna guys were there, but certainly not, an Ericsson or Nokia or Samsung specifically on the show floor.
Well, Nokia was there, but they were there for an entirely different reason.
Right. It wasn't the radio group.
Right. They introduced this whole new thing, for them at least, called network as a code, which is really kind of a Vonage-like play, right? So what they're doing is trying to create a stack that goes from the new modernized 5G networks and provides services and capabilities of the network and making them accessible to developers, right? And so this is sort of very similar to what Ericsson is doing with their global network platform, or GNP. So I think it's a bit of Nokia fast following, or maybe slow following. It depends on how quickly they can progress with this stuff. But it lends a bit of credence to the acquisition, Ericsson's acquisition of Vonage, right? Because that Ericsson has this community, a rather large community of developers that are looking at, that are already using Vonage services. And so now it's a race to see how quickly they can build these ecosystems, these developer ecosystems that are, leveraging these network aware frameworks for application development. So we'll see how that goes. But that was why they were there, right? It wasn't about radios. It wasn't about core. It wasn't about any of that stuff. It's about all these new sort of frontier things that I think the industry is starting to look at.
Right. And you and I were both in Boston for the Ericsson analyst event, right? Where they went deeper on the dive regarding both Cradlepoint and Vonage. So it makes sense that everyone's trying to hop on the Chimera bandwagon at this point to try to figure out how they're going to monetize, something in that particular space. But if we go back to the this Open RAN space, and we have a lot of startup companies, smells like small cells to me. And that one had a lot of carnage. So I'm not sure where that's going to be, but it certainly doesn't bode well for a lot of the guys, at least for the major telco networks around the world. Now, private wireless, always going to be a potential for something on the Open RAN side. So, but that gets a little bit more tricky now in the number of projects that you have to find. Right. And how complex they're going to be on a project-to-project basis, and how customized do they need to be regarding what is the problem you're trying to solve with each one of those enterprises.
Right. And I think there's an attempt to pivot toward private networks. So leveraging ORAN compliant or ORAN based network technology for private networks, right? But I think one of the challenges there is that the whole private network space is something that's just emerging, right? Especially as it relates to 5G. I mean, for LTE, yes. It's been around. Right.
I mean, you have one leg of it that's still the OnGo Alliance guys, and CBRS as one flavor of private wireless. And then you have the more licensed flavor of private wireless with 5G. But if you look at the typical size of these projects, this is where the Ericssons and the Samsungs and the Nokias necessarily don't want to play in trying to deliver a dozen radios or 50 units or something. They want 100,000 radios or 500,000 radios. And the smaller stuff, they're not really geared to go into enterprise. So they would have to have the right partnerships on the channels to kind of pull their product and be the integrators there, because for them to want to do these, an integration of a 10 radio project totally does not make sense, right?
Yeah, right. And then I think what's clear. So I was on a panel for a private 5G network summit that was hosted by the Besson Group, and it was sponsored by Intel, T-Mobile, and Ocean. And one of the things that was very, very clear was that nobody really knows where the big dollars are here, the scale out dollars, what the scale out anything is across private networks. And I think that's going to be a real challenge. And I know that it is a challenge for everybody, big and small, right? Because quite frankly, the way that 5G is positioned, and when I say 5G, I say as a general, in a general way, it doesn't necessarily have a well-known home. You know what I'm saying? And so
Yep.
nobody quite knows, okay, where does it fit? Because number one, even though everyone's trying to make this as easy as Wi-Fi, which I think is quite misguided, way of thinking about how to go to market here, it's expensive, and these differentiated features are not easy or low cost features to deploy. The network actually has to be well engineered, and this is something that I've been talking about for now like 3 years, going into all of this stuff related to private networks. And so, yes, everyone's pivoting in this direction, but guess what? This is not going to be easy. And so, I know we're going to probably be pivoting, quite honestly, a lot of our RAN discussions now toward, okay, what sort of architectures make sense? What are some of the capabilities or benefits that Open RAN architectures can bring to these private scenarios, right? And they're going to be
Right.
many. So I think that's going to be probably an evolution of our own show and our agenda as we look at the future of the RAN and radio to the RIC. But man, it's a lot of crazy stuff is going to happen here.
I think going on this private wireless, we talked about it briefly in our mini recap, but the issue still is, what is the problem you're trying to solve? Why are you putting the network in? Why are you investing in this network in the first place?
Right.
And if it's just layer one connectivity, that's the most simplistic version of a private wireless network, as opposed to a complete digital transformation on the manufacturing side, end to end, and tying both the communication side as well as the industrial equipment side, and having it all completely seamless and bolted together, right?
Yeah.
And that's the much more complicated other bookend of private wireless that is potentially going to take years to figure out how to code all of the required software and everything to get to talk to the robots and the AGVs and whatever else is going on in that type of a very sophisticated and very complex project, compared to just sticking in a bunch of radios and connecting a bunch of phones and tablets.
Yeah. And so earlier you said smells like small cells, right? The Open RAN stuff. Well,
Yeah.
this private 5G stuff smells like IoT. So that's what I actually.
Yeah, and that's not a good smell. So,
yeah.
but IoT also had a problem where most of the players in IoT were one of 15 to 20 different layers within the complete end-to-end solution, and it was very difficult to find one company that encompassed everything end-to-end completely, including the most important part of that layer, or one of the most important layers of that ecosystem, which was the security part, right?
Yeah. Oh, geez.
So anyway,
well, I thought it was already challenging. You just added another layer.
I think the one final note on the Open RAN side is, if the operators, the big telco operators, expect parity performance of any Open RAN vendors' equipment and software to the incumbents, then that's the bar that has to be met. Because that seems like what everyone's summary is always about, is from the operator side, is we're expecting and we're looking forward to parity in performance.
Right. But a lot of the Open RAN vendors have been claiming parity for quite some time. And one of the realities that at least I've uncovered, and I know I'm sure you've seen it yourself as you spoke to folks at Mobile World Congress Las Vegas, is that no, you're not at parity. In fact, in order to reach parity, there's still a lot that needs to be done. In the current architectures, especially in the Open RAN or even vRAN space, as you get closer to the radio, it is just not performant. And so maybe there's a little bit of a dirty laundry statement here, but that's just simply the fact, unless someone can substantially prove otherwise. And I think that that's one of the reasons why the likes of Nokia, Huawei and Ericsson, and I do include Huawei in there because if you don't think that they're not virtualizing and disaggregating certain elements of their own stack, you're behind probably like 3-4 years. No, they've been doing it too. It's just that they're not making it open. Kind of like, what I mean, Ericsson's moving in that direction, Nokia is moving in that direction, and I'm sure Chinese vendors will move in that direction if it makes sense because I think some folks surprisingly don't realize that some of the originators of the ORAN alliance are the Chinese operators. And so from the very beginning, I've been telling the community, this is about the operators, not about vendors. If they want multi-vendor, they want vendor diversity, they will assert that, right?
Right.
That number one thing that the vendor community had to deliver on was exactly what you said, Earl. Parity, performance parity. And when you fail to deliver on that, the vendor diversity stuff, none of that stuff matters, right? It really doesn't, because you're not a choice.
Right. That is the table stakes to get into the game.
Right. Yeah, and so I think there needs to be substantial tuning into the ground truths and coming to market with a degree of honesty because I think one of the key takeaways for me from Mobile World Congress Las Vegas is that shopping nonsense just didn't. You weren't going to go too far with it. There's really not a appetite for it. And, and you can tell by the amount of investment people are making into their presence at the event. This year, it was substantially lower than what we saw last year and years before. Right. So, I mean,
people are still going and getting meeting rooms either on the show floor or upstairs on level 2, but they don't want to be on the actual show floor for whatever reason, right? Whether it's the cost or whether it's the lack of desire to, again, have that exhibit booth space. Otherwise, we would have saw a lot of the vendors upstairs down on the floor as well, but they weren't.
Yeah, and I think maybe next year GSMA might want to fence off the cafeteria area and then rent out.
Exactly. Well, some companies were holding their meetings there, and you know who you are.
Yeah, like a lot, not a few, a lot. I mean, that was like literally you should rent out tables in the cafeteria.
Right, because that was free,
for eat only.
Free meeting room space.
Yeah, free meeting room space. So. But that's just indicative of where the industry is at this point, right? And a point where I think there should be a lot of excitement if we were delivering on the 5G promise. But obviously, even the question of 5G monetization still unanswered. People going around scratching their heads. And then, the other thing that we're seeing is sort of this resurgent as we're looking at the private enterprise industrial pivot is like the big MNOs like Verizon, T-Mobile, AT&T coming in with their business groups. So their business groups made a huge presence. But one of the things that I noticed is they're coming in with some of the same use cases that they did like 3-4 years ago, right? There's really nothing has really changed. And sometimes I wonder whether or not these folks who head these business organizations have done their homework, quite honestly, because they were snoozers. So feedback to those folks who lead these groups, reaction wasn't entirely positive. So that's a little freebie for you guys out there. A lot of.
I think the Chinese operators have figured out how to monetize a fair portion of their 5G spectrum in terms of how they're doing their partnerships with the OEMs and their partnerships with the industrial and other large enterprise corporations. But that's completely different scale, right? Compared to here in the US or maybe in Europe.
Right. And then they also have more pervasive or expansive shared infrastructure models, shared business models than, cross operator models than what you might see here in the United States. Because, I mean, let's be honest, this year it was like the T-Mobile show, right? They came out swinging.
Yeah. Swinging hard.
It was like, wow, okay. In terms of partnering, it's hard to see T-Mobile partnering with anyone because they're loud and proud. You know what I'm saying? Everything is magenta, right? And so yeah, it's in North America, in the Americas, I think 2024 is looking to be a soul-searching year.
Yeah, I mean, if I look at it from the regular RAN side, right? Latin America right now, tough market. It always pretty much is solely based on, the ups and downs of Brazil, because that drives the whole region. Yeah. Certainly, they're looking at Open RAN. And with Telefonica, obviously based out of Europe, having a major presence down in Brazil and such, and with Tim as well. I think there's ideas of what they'd like to achieve, but again, they're not going to be fooled into trying to deploy something that just really isn't going to work, right? So they have aspirations, but Huawei is still substantially present down in Latin America. So it may be virtual, it may be cloud, but it may not be open, depending on what can be delivered to the operators, specifically in Brazil and some of the other markets in Latin America.
Yeah, and I think that puts a lot of pressure on the open vendors to seek performance parity, and for the likes of Ericsson and Nokia to sustain or at least continue to compete with Huawei and parity.
Right, and I still think
that we're talking about this, given like the clean network initiative that the Department of Commerce instituted. I think it was like 2022. I think, yeah. It's hard to remember. So many things happening, Yeah,
I mean, and again, going back to the radio, it's always going to be about the haves and have-nots on the components and semiconductors inside, and these emerging players are not going to have the amplifier technologies and components that the Ericssons, Nokias, and Samsungs and Huawei's and ZTEs are going to have access to, because they're buying them into tens of millions of units. Yeah. And you're trying to get a quote for 1,000 pieces or something to start off with, right? Yeah. It's just not going to be available to them.
Yeah. It's tricky, but there actually are a couple of answers there. It's just unfortunate that they haven't been explored, but that's for clients only, right?
Absolutely. Fixed wireless is another 5G area that everyone's been buzzing about, right? Is how to, at least the operators are trying to tell Wall Street, we can make it go, we can get some ARPU, and we can increase our revenue somehow with FWA. And specifically along that line, in terms of that marketplace, most of this rural area where everyone's trying to target already has some incumbent broadband service there. So now, how do you churn off those guys? And if it's a WISP, then they could do it fairly cheaply. So for T-Mobile or someone else to come into a market where a WISP is already there, sure, you can bundle your mobile with your broadband and whatever, but the network costs for the WISP are substantially lower because it's Wi-Fi based still. Doesn't rely on 5G and all of this other stuff. And then at the end of the day, you just need a really good Wi-Fi signal, and you can get broadband. Then that may still win over any other new player entering into that market. So it's going to be a big battle to kind of churn a lot of these subs. And one of the things that's going to be on one of the new tools in the toolkit for the WISP is going to be 60 gigahertz. And there's been a lot of bad press about 60 gigs over the years. Specifically the WiGig standards and organizations. But recently here in the US, channels 5 and 6 are now available, which is the upper band of the 60 gig here. And you're going to have link distances similar to 28 gigahertz. You don't have to worry about rain or fog and a lot of the other things. And so that might allow the WISP to have yet another frequency band to work with and wider bandwidth too, because there's about 4 or 5 gigahertz of spectrum that they get to use unlicensed.
Yeah.
And so that's going to be, again, how do you, as an operator going into this market with your 28 gig or C-band spectrum, how are you going to price it? How are you going to bundle it? And if at the end of the day, you just want to stream whatever bits, then that cost is still going to be potentially a winner for a WISP.
Yeah, yeah, and maybe this is a godsend for the Telegraph folks.
Yeah, even without them, I think there's some vendors, and there was one vendor there specifically that is on the semiconductor side that actually has the chipsets and everything to enable channels 5 and 6, which Qualcomm still doesn't have available yet, and for their chipset solution. So I think, Peraso Technologies or Peraso Incorporated out of Canada, they're probably going to be a winner in the 60 gig right now, early on, because they have the semiconductor chips to enable these systems. And it's going to be interesting to see. But 60 gig is not dead, I guess, is my perspective at this point. And that was something new in terms of what's happening on the WISP side of things relative to the mobile operator side using millimeter wave or C-band.
Yeah, that's interesting. I bumped into those guys last year at MWC Las Vegas. So, hey, you just gave me a reason to go to Mobile World Congress Las Vegas 2024. You never know who you're going to bump into, no matter what the
Certainly, even if the exhibit hall is continuing to shrink, the meetings are still good, and there's still a lot to be learned, right?
Yeah, for the analysts.
In the hallways or wherever people are meeting in the cafeteria.
Yeah, there's never a bad event, right? You can always leave early if you want. So, actually take advantage of the hospitality tax that they impose on you in Las Vegas. Maybe go get a massage or whatever, but
have some great Japanese food like we did.
Yeah. And so speaking of client only, hey, you have a new study coming out, right?
I just published and released a report on the next 5-year forecast for the global market for radios. And hopefully we'll have a new report on the market share of said industry to see who's going to be number one. But it's pretty obvious it's going to be Huawei, like it was for the baseband unit side and for the distributed unit. The question is who's number two is, what I'm looking at analyzing and determining right now. So hopefully that'll be out in a couple of weeks. But yeah, new forecast out. It's not pretty. Shouldn't be a surprise, right? To anyone out there in the industry. The question is when is the recovery point? And with or without China becomes a very big question one has to ask. And if it's without China, it's a little bit longer than anyone wants.
Don't give up too much, man. It's like for a moment I was going to say you were like the master of the teaser, and then I'm realizing you're giving up all the good stuff. But
cut it out.
And what, we'll also provide a link to Earl's study as well as a short little summary, or what do they call those? I forgot the name. Abstract. Yeah.
Abstract.
On the neXt Curve site. So you can find it there as well as on the EJL Wireless Research website. So, but Earl, hey, thanks again. It's always great hanging out.
Always great, Leonard. Thank you so much for having me on here. It's just great to chat about what we're seeing, and hopefully the people viewing will get some insight into what our insights are. And if they want more details, then they can contact either you or myself, right?
Yeah, and I don't think we talked about anything that was like out of a press release. So, folks, you wanna hear some like solid, killer stuff. That's not just a regurgitation of a press release. This is where you come.
And also remember that whatever we're talking about is the tip of the iceberg. Yeah. And there is less than 1% of what I know that I'm willing to say publicly. But for the clients that I have, they'll have the entire understanding of what I know and what I heard at the show that I'm certainly not going to publish.
Yeah. And I have a big mouth, so everybody knows what I think. So that's my problem. Anyway. All right. So in closing, if you want to reach Earl, go and check out the EJL Wireless Research website, which is at www.ejlwireless.com, and connect with him on LinkedIn, as he has well incriminated himself on several times and several occasions already. He is the criminal of the RAN. Okay.
Exactly. And we are not drinking alcohol today.
No, he's better not be. And make sure to subscribe to the Next Curve YouTube channel here on YouTube if you're watching it on YouTube. The easiest thing, though, to find all stuff Next Curve is to go to our research portal, which is at www.next-curve.com. And it's a great one-stop shop for all Next Curve stuff. And you'll be notified when we publish new articles and content like this wonderful podcast. And also make sure to subscribe to our newsletter. And so that's it for our recap of Mobile World Congress, Las Vegas 2023. Again, you are tuning into From the Radio to the RIC. Did I get it right this time?
I believe you did, Leonard.
Okay, cool. And we will see you next time. Probably really soon, because this is like event season, so it's a crazy schedule we have. So 5G Americas, we will see you
In Dallas. Thanks.